Trump and Netanyahu made a strategic mistake against Iran that could prove fatal for them. The confident predictions of quick and decisive victory that emanated from Washington and Tel Aviv are collapsing with each passing hour, replaced by a dawning recognition that something has gone profoundly wrong. The shock and awe strategy that was supposed to neutralize Iranian capability and produce rapid capitulation has instead triggered a cascading regional crisis that threatens to consume the very powers that initiated it. As Iranian missiles continue to strike targets across the Middle East, as oil markets spike toward crisis levels, as regional allies experience bombardment they explicitly requested to avoid, and as the promised quick war stretches into an indefinite confrontation, a troubling conclusion is emerging. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have made a strategic mistake against Iran that could prove fatal not for Tehran, but for their own political futures and the regional order they sought to impose. Hey everyone, I'm Michael Harris, geopolitical and military analyst, and you're watching my channel. What I'm about to share with you examines how the fundamental miscalculations underlying this assault have positioned Trump and Netanyahu in a strategic trap of their own making. The Iranian response has exceeded every expectation. The regional consequences are spiraling beyond control, and the economic dimensions threaten to transform military adventure into political catastrophe. Before we analyze how this situation developed and where it is heading, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment with your thoughts as we go through this together, and share this video with everyone who needs to understand why this war may prove to be the defining mistake of both Trump's presidency and Netanyahu's long career. Now let's examine the evidence that the architects of this assault have trapped themselves in a conflict they cannot win. The strategic logic that guided this operation appeared straightforward on paper. Strike fast, strike hard, and impose a shock sufficient to neutralize Iranian capability before the conflict could expand. This approach, often called rapid dominance or shock and awe, relies on technological superiority and precision strikes to destroy critical infrastructure, disorganize command structures, and prevent any coherent response. The targets were carefully selected: military installations, ballistic missile sites, naval facilities threatening the Strait of Hormuz, and leadership compounds where decision-makers gathered. The expectation was that overwhelming force applied in concentrated fashion would produce immediate strategic effect, leaving Iran disoriented and incapable of meaningful retaliation. 900 strikes in 12 hours against 500 targets represented the application of this doctrine at its most intensive. But this logic works only against adversaries with centralized, vulnerable military structures dependent on identifiable critical infrastructure. Iran represents something entirely different. For 47 years, Iranian strategists have anticipated precisely this scenario. The international sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and repeated confrontations with the United States pushed Tehran to develop a military architecture specifically designed to survive an initial shock and maintain retaliatory capability indefinitely. The underground missile cities extending 500 meters beneath mountain ranges, the dispersed command structures with multiple redundancies, the mobile launchers that can operate from concealed positions, the regional network of allies positioned to open multiple fronts simultaneously. All of this was built for exactly the scenario now unfolding. The American planners who designed this assault apparently believed they could destroy what decades of Iranian engineering specifically protected against destruction. The evidence of this miscalculation is visible in the missiles that continue to fly from Iranian territory despite the unprecedented scale of bombardment. If 900 strikes had achieved their objectives, Iranian launch capability would have been eliminated. Instead, Iran is conducting what it describes as the heaviest offensive operations in the history of the armed forces of the Islamic Republic. Within hours of the initial assault, Iranian missiles were falling not only on Israel, but on virtually every nation hosting American military installations. The United Arab Emirates received more than 300 missiles, exceeding the number initially fired at Israel. Qatar received approximately 65. Bahrain received approximately 35. Explosions were heard in Riyadh. Missiles were fired toward Cyprus, bringing the conflict to Europe's doorstep. This is not the desperate flailing of a regime on the verge of collapse. This is the methodical implementation of contingency plans developed over decades, demonstrating that the fundamental premise of the American strategy was wrong. The regional dimension of Iranian response represents perhaps the most significant miscalculation by Trump and Netanyahu. By striking every nation hosting American military installations, Iran has accomplished multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. It has demonstrated that alignment with the United States carries severe and immediate costs, potentially deterring future cooperation with American operations. It has stretched American defensive capabilities across an enormous perimeter, forcing the simultaneous defense of multiple countries while conducting offensive operations against Iran. It has created pressure on regional governments from populations experiencing bombardment they did not choose and do not support. And it has raised the economic stakes by threatening the oil infrastructure and shipping lanes upon which the global economy depends. The Gulf states that now find themselves under Iranian missile attack explicitly requested that the United States not launch this war. They understood, better than Washington apparently did, that their geographic proximity to Iran would make them immediate targets. Their concerns were dismissed. Now they are experiencing the consequences of decisions made without their consent. The assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, celebrated in Washington and Tel Aviv as a decisive blow, may prove to have been a catastrophic error rather than a strategic triumph. The logic of decapitation assumes that eliminating leadership will paralyze decision-making and produce organizational collapse. But the Islamic Republic was designed with precisely this scenario in mind. Successors were identified and prepared. Command structures were established with multiple redundancies. The government continues to function, and the missiles continue to fly. What the assassination has actually accomplished is the transformation of Khamenei into a martyr whose memory will inspire resistance for generations. The Iranian population, whatever its previous grievances against its government, is now united in grief and rage against the foreign powers that murdered their spiritual leader during the holy month of Ramadan. The domestic uprising that American planners apparently hoped to trigger has instead been replaced by national solidarity against external aggression, exactly as any competent analyst of nationalist movements would have predicted. The economic dimensions of this strategic error are already becoming visible and will intensify as the conflict continues. The Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of global oil exports pass daily, has always been Iran's ultimate leverage point. For decades, Iranian strategists have articulated a clear doctrine. If Iranian oil exports are blocked or if Iran faces direct aggression, no other regional actor will be able to use this energy corridor freely. This is not empty rhetoric, but reflects capabilities painstakingly developed over years. Anti-ship missiles capable of striking any vessel within range. Naval mines that can be deployed rapidly and are extremely difficult to clear. Small submarines optimized for the confined waters of the Gulf. Fast attack craft employing swarm tactics against larger vessels. The Gorajask pipeline that allows Iran to continue its own exports through the Gulf of Oman while retaining the capability to disrupt rival shipments. If Iran implements the strait disruption that its doctrine has long contemplated, oil prices will spike to levels that trigger global recession. The economic prosperity that Trump promised American voters will be replaced by inflation, supply chain disruption, and financial market chaos directly attributable to his decision to launch this war. The temporal dimension of this conflict represents another critical miscalculation. Trump suggested that operations could conclude in 2 to 3 days. Netanyahu promised quick and decisive action that would create conditions for regional peace. These predictions were always fantasy for anyone familiar with Iranian strategic culture, and the reality is demonstrating just how detached from reality they were. The Iranian approach to conflict, shaped by the devastating 8-year war with Iraq in the 1980s, emphasizes survival, resilience, and the transformation of conflict into prolonged attrition. Iranian strategists do not need to defeat American forces in conventional battle. They need only to extend the conflict, multiply its costs, and maintain pressure until the political will of their adversaries erodes. This approach has proven effective throughout history against technologically superior opponents, from Vietnam to Afghanistan to Iraq itself. There is no reason to believe it will prove less effective against the same American military establishment that failed in all those previous conflicts. The multiplication of fronts that Iranian strategy enables represents a particularly severe challenge for American and Israeli planners. Unlike conventional adversaries who can be engaged on a single battlefield, Iran possesses what analysts describe as an architecture of distributed response. Hezbollah in Lebanon retains thousands of rockets and missiles despite Israeli efforts at degradation, with half of them within range of Israeli cities. Iraqi militias maintain capability to strike American bases throughout that country. Houthi forces in Yemen have demonstrated remarkable capacity to strike targets across the Arabian Peninsula and disrupt Red Sea shipping. Each of these actors can open fronts that disperse American defensive resources across an enormous geographic expanse. A war that was supposed to be a concentrated strike against Iranian territory has instead become a regional conflagration, requiring simultaneous engagement in multiple countries. The logistical and strategic complexity of managing such dispersed operations far exceeds what the initial planning apparently contemplated. The saturation doctrine that Iranian missile forces employ represents another dimension of capability that American planners may have underestimated. Rather than relying on isolated precision strikes, Iranian strategy emphasizes launching sufficient numbers of missiles simultaneously to overwhelm defensive systems. Even the most sophisticated air defense networks, including Israel's Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems, possess finite interception capacity. If enough projectiles are launched simultaneously, some will penetrate. Iranian missiles have also been designed to target specific vulnerabilities in defensive systems, with some variants capable of engaging the radars and electronic infrastructure that defensive networks depend upon. By degrading detection capability before launching subsequent waves, Iranian forces can progressively erode the defensive advantage that American and Israeli technology provides. The missiles continuing to strike targets throughout the region demonstrate that this doctrine is functioning as designed. The strategic resilience that Iranian society has demonstrated throughout its modern history represents perhaps the most significant factor that Trump and Netanyahu failed to account for. The Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, which killed hundreds of thousands of Iranians with active American support for Saddam Hussein, profoundly shaped Iranian strategic culture. That experience demonstrated the capacity of Iranian society to absorb massive casualties while maintaining political and military mobilization over years of conflict. The sanctions that have strangled the Iranian economy for decades have similarly demonstrated that Iranian society can endure severe deprivation without the political collapse that American policymakers repeatedly predicted. The assumption that a few days of bombing would produce capitulation reflects American wishful thinking rather than any realistic assessment of Iranian national character. Iran has survived everything the United States has inflicted over 47 years. There is no reason to believe this assault will prove different. The international dimension of this conflict has evolved in ways that further constrain American options and benefit Iranian strategy. European allies, while expressing concern about Iranian nuclear activities, have not endorsed this military assault and have called for de-escalation. China and Russia, Iran's strategic partners, have condemned the attack as a violation of international law. The United Nations Security Council is deadlocked, with vetoes preventing any resolution that would legitimize American actions. The Global South, watching a major power bomb a sovereign nation without meaningful international consequence, is drawing conclusions about the reliability of international law and the nature of American hegemony. Iran, far from being isolated, finds itself with considerable international sympathy as the victim of aggression. The coalition that was supposed to support this operation is instead fracturing, while Iran's relationships with major powers remain intact. The nuclear dimension of this conflict adds another layer of risk that the assault may have intensified rather than reduced. American and Israeli officials justified the attack partly as preventing Iranian nuclear capability, but the effect of the assault may prove precisely opposite. In an environment of open confrontation, Iranian incentives to cooperate with international monitoring mechanisms diminish dramatically. The leadership that survives this assault will calculate that only nuclear capability provides genuine protection against American aggression. The facilities that matter most for any weapons program are buried too deep to destroy with conventional munitions. And Iran's strategic partnership with Russia and access to Chinese technology provide pathways to capability that sanctions cannot fully interdict. The war that was supposed to prevent Iranian nuclear weapons may instead provide the final impetus for their development, producing exactly the outcome it was designed to prevent. The political consequences for Trump and Netanyahu may prove as severe as the strategic consequences for their nations. Trump built his political brand on promises of winning, of deals, of outcomes that benefit America. A prolonged military quagmire in the Middle East contradicts that brand fundamentally. As oil prices rise and inflation accelerates, as American bases continue to experience missile attacks, as the promised quick victory recedes into indefinite conflict, political support will erode. The midterm elections that will determine control of Congress are approaching, and a failing war is not the backdrop that benefits Republican candidates. Netanyahu, who has devoted his career to the destruction of Iranian capability, may find that his ultimate achievement is a regional war that damages Israel more severely than any previous conflict. The missiles falling on Israeli cities, the reservists called up by the tens of thousands, the economic disruption, the international isolation, these costs will be attributed directly to his decisions. The political survival of both leaders is now tied to a conflict whose trajectory they cannot control. The question that haunts every strategic assessment of this situation is what endgame this operation is actually pursuing. If the goal is regime change, history offers no example of air power alone producing such a result against a determined adversary with dispersed capabilities and resilient society. If the goal is eliminating Iranian nuclear capability, the facilities that matter most are buried beyond the reach of conventional weapons. If the goal is degrading Iranian military capability, the missiles continuing to fly demonstrate failure. If the goal is deterring future Iranian actions, the scale and determination of the current response suggests the opposite effect. Each stated objective is failing to materialize, while consequences that were supposedly not intended are multiplying. The strategy has produced tactical destruction, but strategic failure, exactly the pattern that characterized previous American military adventures that ended in humiliation. The path forward offers no good options for Trump and Netanyahu. Escalation, including the threatened unprecedented force, risks triggering responses that could include attacks on American territory and the complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The rhetoric of unlimited violence has backed them into a corner where they may feel compelled to take actions that produce catastrophic consequences. De-escalation would require accepting that the assault failed and that Iran has successfully resisted American and Israeli power, a humiliation that neither leader's personality permits. Continuation of current operations perpetuates regional chaos without producing the decisive victory that was promised. Each path carries costs that the architects of this war apparently failed to consider before initiating it. I want to hear your thoughts on this analysis. Do you believe Trump and Netanyahu understood the strategic trap they were walking into? Or did hubris blind them to realities that any serious student of Iranian capabilities would have recognized? What happens when leaders stake their political futures on quick victories that reality refuses to deliver? How will history judge the decision to launch this assault? Drop your comments below. The comparison to previous American strategic failures is instructive and deeply unflattering to the architects of this assault. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 was accompanied by identical predictions of quick victory, grateful populations welcoming liberation, and democratic transformation that would reshape the region. 20 years later, Iraq remains unstable. Iranian influence there is greater than ever, and the American military departed in circumstances far from the triumph that was promised. The intervention in Libya in 2011 was supposed to be a limited operation empowering democratic forces. Instead, Libya collapsed into civil war, became a hub for human trafficking and terrorism, and demonstrated that destroying a regime is far easier than building anything to replace it. Afghanistan, after 20 years of American occupation and trillions of dollars expended, fell to the Taliban within weeks of American withdrawal. Each of these cases demonstrates a consistent pattern. American military power can destroy but cannot build, can kill leaders but cannot create stable governance, can initiate conflicts but cannot control their trajectories. Iran, larger, more populous, better prepared, and more geographically defensible than any of these previous targets, represents the most challenging adversary American forces have ever engaged in the Middle East. The intelligence failure underlying this assault deserves particular examination because it reveals the systemic limitations of American strategic analysis regarding Iran. American intelligence agencies possess extraordinary technical capabilities for monitoring Iranian activities from space, intercepting communications, and tracking military deployments. What they consistently fail to capture is strategic intention, cultural resilience, and the depth of preparation that cannot be photographed by satellites. They counted Iranian missiles and launchers visible from orbit. They apparently failed to adequately assess the underground infrastructure protecting strategic reserves, the dispersed mobile launchers that can operate from concealed positions, and the redundancy built into every aspect of Iranian planning. The missiles falling on American allies today are being launched from facilities that survived the initial assault because Iranian engineers built them to survive exactly such an attack. And American intelligence either did not know about these facilities or did not communicate their significance to political leaders eager for reassurance that the operation would succeed. The psychological warfare component of American and Israeli strategy, including calls for Iranian military personnel to surrender and appeals to the population to seize their freedom, reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how nations respond to external attack. Populations under bombardment do not typically calculate that their best option is collaboration with those dropping the bombs. They rally to their flag, regardless of previous political views. They remember who is killing their countrymen and destroying their cities. They develop grievances that persist for generations. The children of Tehran experiencing this assault will carry its memory throughout their lives. They will remember where they were when they learned their supreme leader had been murdered. They will remember the terror of explosions, the grief of funerals, the humiliation of their nation being attacked by powers that consider themselves above international law. These memories will shape their views of the United States and Israel for decades, creating a reservoir of hostility that no future diplomatic effort can easily drain. The religious dimension of this conflict amplifies its consequences in ways that secular Western analysts consistently underestimate. Ayatollah Khamenei was not merely a political leader, but a religious authority whose guidance was followed by millions of Shia Muslims worldwide. His assassination during Ramadan, the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, was experienced not merely as political attack, but as deliberate desecration. The mobs that attempted to storm the American embassy in Baghdad, the demonstrations in Pakistan, the mobilization across Shia communities worldwide represent early manifestations of religious solidarity that transcends national boundaries and will persist long after any ceasefire. The war that was supposed to demonstrate American and Israeli strength has instead united the Shia world against them in ways that will shape regional politics for generations. The alliance structure that was supposed to support this operation is instead experiencing severe strain. The Gulf states that host American military installations find themselves under missile attack because of decisions made without their consent. The Emiratis are warning they will not tolerate continued bombardment. The Qataris are watching missiles fall near the base hosting 10,000 American personnel. The Saudis are hearing explosions in their capital. These nations calculate their interests in terms of decades, not news cycles. They understand that Iran will remain their neighbor long after American attention shifts elsewhere. The experience of being dragged into a war they explicitly requested to avoid may fundamentally reshape their calculations about the value of American partnership. The normalization with Israel that Netanyahu envisions as the reward for this war may prove impossible when Arab populations have witnessed their cities bombarded as a consequence of that partnership. The domestic political dynamics within the United States and Israel add another layer of constraint that may force both leaders into decisions they would otherwise avoid. Trump built his political identity on winning, on deals, on outcomes that benefit America first. A prolonged military quagmire that raises gas prices, disrupts supply chains, and exposes American personnel to ongoing attack contradicts that identity fundamentally. The voters who supported him expecting prosperity may not remain supportive when the costs of this adventure become visible in their daily lives. Netanyahu, facing his own political challenges, staked everything on the promise that destroying Iranian capability would create conditions for regional peace. As missiles continue to fall on Israeli cities, as reservists are called up by the tens of thousands, as the promised quick victory recedes into indefinite conflict, his political survival becomes increasingly uncertain. Both leaders may find that the war they launched to demonstrate strength instead demonstrates the limits of their judgment. The economic consequences that are already materializing will intensify as the conflict continues, creating political pressures that constrain military options. Oil prices have already spiked, and significant disruption of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz would send them to levels not seen since the 1970s crisis. The inflation that is already straining household budgets would accelerate dramatically. Supply chains that depend on affordable energy would face disruption. Stock markets would experience volatility that threatens retirement accounts and investment portfolios. The economic prosperity that political leaders require to maintain popular support would be undermined by decisions they made in pursuit of strategic objectives that now appear unachievable. The war that was supposed to eliminate threats is instead creating economic threats that affect every American household. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand that the strategic mistake Trump and Netanyahu made against Iran may prove fatal, not for Tehran, but for their own political futures and the regional order they sought to impose. I'm Michael Harris. The war that was supposed to demonstrate American and Israeli power is instead demonstrating its limits, as Iranian capabilities that were dismissed as inferior prove capable of imposing costs that transform military adventure into strategic catastrophe. The missiles continue to fly, the regional crisis continues to deepen, the economic consequences continue to mount, and the quick victory that was promised recedes further with each passing hour into a prolonged confrontation that neither Trump nor Netanyahu can end on terms they will accept. This is not the script they wrote, but it may be the script that Iranian strategists wrote decades ago, waiting patiently for the moment when American and Israeli hubris would deliver exactly the confrontation they had prepared for. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and understand that the strategic mistake made this week may reshape the Middle East for generations to come. I'll see you in the next video.